Okay, so this is a Defiant curved LED security lighting. It's a motion sensor light. It's being sold at Home Depot and other home improvement stores for exterior use. You can also use these interior, not really a problem on that. They require 120 volt wiring, even though internally it has a little converter, because all LEDs are actually DC. So it's got an interior converter to change that over from the 120 volt over to 12 volt. The question on these is, and I haven't been able to take one apart, or haven't wanted to, these sensors a lot of times are AC. So if that's a DC sensor and DC lighting, then if you're creative and you want to get inside of one of these things, you can make these run on 12 volt DC for an off-grid system. This particular one is going on a regular building, so it's going to be just hardwired into the grid. What I've done here is I've gotten this Carlton brand boxes. I like these for exterior use because I can pre-wire everything on a workbench. And when I pre-wire everything on a workbench, I can let the silicone ceiling harden up and then go and install this as a unit. So if I'm up on a ladder, I'm not having to do a bunch of wire stripping and a lot of that kind of stuff. So basically, what I do is I put this together as a sub-assembly with my electrical components. Now, what comes with the light, though, is everything that attaches to this. This is what I had to buy separately, and of course all the wiring and all of that. This comes with the light, and so what you'll do is you'll set your wiring up here. This little cross piece came with the light. You notice there's a tiny little screwdriver, little eyeglasses screwdriver. That actually came with the light too. So what we would do is we run the wires through this opening, and it's generously sized, because sometimes the way these things are, there's a little notch and you'll end up in the edge of that. So what we would do is we put this here. There's a longer screw that came with the kit that's going to attach that to our crossbar, and then there's a screw on the front of the light right there, which corresponds to this captive screw with a nut on it that's going to screw into this. Now notice that's off center, so this needs to be facing up. That's up. Regardless of what direction all that wire comes through, it comes through this port, faces up. Now, if you look here, and it is labeled your black wire and your white wire, they actually have to bend down, get into this, you tighten it with a little eyeglasses screwdriver, and that's what attaches here. And when this is on the wall, you do all your mounting with this, and then after this is mounted and set, you'll be able to hold this up, tighten that single screw down, and that's what holds it together. These little pinpoints are just for alignment. No screws or bolts go through those. These little pinpoints will correspond to these, and that's what powers the system. So all of your voltage conversion, everything happens inside of this. Once that's mounted, you can point the lights in logical directions or leave them together for basically 180 degree or a half circle coverage. There are some other models which will do a wider coverage. And then all of your controls for timing and everything are on the side of the sensor device. And you can set this up like this. Usually it's going to be set up like this, and notice that our controls ended up upside down for some reason. Now, you can twist this around, but what happens is you can bind up and screw up the wires inside. So it's better to just do your little bit of programming and then work with that. But when you orient one of these things, they can be roof oriented or wall oriented. You generally don't mount it like this. Even though it may look like that's right side up on this, you generally do not mount it like this. You mount it with a sensor below the lights. So in programming this, you know, it can get a little tricky. When I pop another one out of the box, this thing was right side up. So regardless of whether it reads right side up or upside down, you're going to need it to be in this configuration. So for waterproofing these, they talk about this. If you want to run silicone sealer around the edges of this and around the edge of the box, it's going to be even more waterproof. However, This system here is all relatively self-contained. I would recommend under the eaves installation where, you know, maybe it gets a little rain every once in a while, or when you're cleaning it with a hose, but only if there's a lot of wind. I would recommend not putting this out in a area where it's going to get full-on weather all the time. You kind of want this under an eave or under something where it's not going to get full-on weather all of the time. And I would say that the service life on this is going to be much longer than a comparable incandescent bulb fixture that would be using one of these, but maybe not quite the same as the all-metal ones and the ones you're going to find in the electrical section of your store, which you know, they don't necessarily have the built-in sensor. And there are other ways to do this where the sensor is a separate item, everything's hardwired. They have a place. This modular system is pretty good. It's going on a house to make it more desirable for sale. And these are relatively adaptable to off-grid stuff. It's about $100. You're not saving any money on this versus the hardwired system when it comes to the materials, but it is faster and less labor intensive to go together. So we'll show this at the next stage. Alright, so with the silicone on here, so again, because it's not an exact fit, these two parts are made by two different companies that didn't know they would work together. So we set that on and tighten it down. Notice there's a little breather gap on that, and we're going to eliminate that. Now, it's possible for this thing to still breathe through the crack that's going to be here, but it's going to be a much better seal than what we have on this, which is not that much of a seal. So when I treated this one with a silicone, I'm going to let it set up before I put the other piece on there. I'm going to let that set up, because if I put it on too soon, then that stuff isn't really going to stay in the gaps. It's going to rub around. And so we let that silicone set but not fully harden before putting the cap on. Okay, so this is what it looks like buttoned up. The silicone hardened mostly, but not all the way. Again, this can take a little while. But I needed it to be firm enough to hold shape when I close that lid. And then trim the wires back a little bit. It's a relatively short splice to go into these things. If you think this little screwdriver isn't screwdriver enough to get into this, because it's basically an eyeglasses screwdriver, you could break into one of these little kits here and find a really small tip one. I didn't bother to do that, but you could find a really small tip one out of one of these kits to do that. We ground wire onto this. Now there's a little metal plate back here that will reconnect to the other ground parts inside of this thing, and that ground wire kind of rubs on that other plate, but it's almost irrelevant when you're connecting to the housing and it's all a plastic housing. So beyond that, the other thing I really like is trying to build these as a module before they get attached anywhere is, you know, testing. So rigging up something with a little plug to test everything before it goes in. Not absolutely necessary, but it helps. I'm going to do that for bench testing and demonstrating how the controls work on the light. Alright, so here's how it looks up on the wall mounted. I got a hole here going through the whole thing. Now normally you would want to caulk all this in. Okay, you'd want to caulk all this in. What's happening here is this siding's all getting replaced this year. One of the reasons I didn't want to do one of these housings with the screws in the back of the housing, so that when the siding guys come through, all they have to do is undo this thing, cut everything else away. They don't have to undo the entire fixture and the entire housing and take it all apart. The same with this little keeper thing, which it basically is just going to shape and train this rubber hose to the point that when they go and put the other siding on here, you're probably not going to need that. This stuff is pretty stiff, and that's going to hold its shape. Now this, when I had it on the bench, it had the wrong orientation because it left, right, up, and down. But it basically says this side up. We have this. The controls then are on the lower side. And you can kind of move it so you can reach the thing. So what I'm going to do is, you know, set that So let's see. I'm not going to set it on test yet. I'm going to have 5 minutes. Low, medium, H. I don't know what that means, but I'm guessing high. For the on time, dual bright, off 3 hours, 6 hours, dusk to dawn. I'm setting that for dusk to dawn. We don't want these things going off in the daytime. And I'm going to double check that because I pretty much don't, I don't want this coming on at all in the daytime. And we'll do all the adjustment here when it gets dark. But that's pretty much how that thing goes.